My guest this week is Mary Grabar. She is a resident fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization, the author of Debunking Howard Zinn, and she has a new book just released this week entitled Debunking the 1619 Project. Obviously, I was looking forward to this conversation. One, because with the new book, we write about the same thing. I have a book coming out in November, which is in large part about the 1619 Project. And it would be interesting to pick her brain, I thought, and talk about some of the similarities of the things we write about and see what she noticed that I may not have noticed in the other way. But another interesting thing is when I pitched my book to the publisher, I pitched it as think Debunking Howard Zinn, but about BLM and the 1619 Project. So she was a bit of a muse for the writing of the book. So I was really excited to talk to her. And Mary and I talk about her new book and the problems with the 1619 Project. And here's the first segment of that interview. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, it's really great to have you. We have some parallel thinking here in your book and my upcoming book. You beat me by a couple months, but your new book, Debunking the 1619 Project, is obviously interesting to me because this is something I write about and rail against on a regular basis. And I guess I want to start by asking you why you took the 1619 Project to task in your new book.
Well, I had written the book on Howard Zinn, Debunking Howard Zinn, and since I, was teaching at the college level beginning in the 1990s, I was appalled by what I saw as indoctrination through a distortion of history and our literary heritage, and started writing about that. And so my book on Howard Zinn came out a couple years ago, and then the 1619 Project came out, and I didn't think it could get much worse than Howard Zinn. But the 1619 Project, in terms of promoting falsehoods and twisting and skewing our history, is on the same level. She takes a slightly different tack and, of course, focuses on the legacy of slavery, pretty much exclusively. So I felt that, I needed to, look things up, find out, what was missing, and propose this book, to Regnery, and it is, it's out.
Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that I did the hard work too. People should pay us just for that. But I'm assuming you read the entire project. So obviously there's an overarching theme, but what would you say in reading it was the thing that took you aback the most, the thing you were most shocked by, or the thing that you thought was most troublesome in the project?
Well, the idea that we were founded as a, as they call it, a slaveocracy, and and that this was an exclusively white American thing. It had never happened in the world before, and that we are still under the same system. We have not gone beyond it, as it's presented in stereotypical form, and that no progress has been made from this sort of fictional beginning. And, anyone who, sort of looks around will say, wait a minute, that's ludicrous. And it is.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that last part. There's a lot to it to not like, obviously. But what's most important, and what I talk about a lot, is that the reason I think it's so dangerous is because people will say, well, I read some of it and you can't say all of it's not true. I say, no, but that's the most dangerous part. If it was all farce, then you just laugh at them and say, look at what these crazy people wrote. The fact that they weave in enough facts that if you don't know history that well, you're like, well, this makes sense. And then they add all this other stuff to it. That's what makes it dangerous, because you can't just say all of it. So are you saying all of it's not true? Of course I'm not saying all of it's not true. But you hit the key thing. The thing that struck me that was the most glaring, and I say this often, was that there was no positives in the project. So, if we assume that all the things that they wrote were true and things were just as bad, so bad before, and they do a great job of painting these pictures when they talk about factual bad racism, that they pick a person, so they humanize it. They talk about this person and what happened to them, and it's glaring, right? And they do a good job of explaining it. But the overarching point I see in the project is they tie everything today to slavery. So if you lose your job today as a Black man, slavery. One of the articles, one of the essays talks about traffic. If you ever got caught in a traffic jam in Atlanta, slavery, right? So the belief that you're going to tie everything that happens today, any equality that you see, any opposite outcomes between groups, and tie it to slavery, and then, like you say, act as if there's no progress. Somebody has to cry foul on this, because it's not only is it not true, it's basically negating and disrespecting everything that everyone has fought for. All of the leaders that they cherish, your Dr. Kings and people like that, all of the people who did fight to make things better. You're basically just trying to erase all of that and saying it didn't mean anything.
I think that's in a nutshell. I mean, 100 years ago, when there actually was Jim Crow and lynchings, you didn't hear this kind of rhetoric, that there was no progress made. If you read James Weldon Johnson's poem, 50 Years, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, he talks about how far we've come. Look at the progress we've made, as Black people had. And so, his poem was published in the New York Times, and it was a celebration. Yes, there is discrimination, there is segregation, but look at how far, he said that they had come, how far we have come. It's something to celebrate, not to get bogged down and say, oh, the situation is hopeless. That's what students are hearing these days. And it's so harmful. That's what, you scholars at the Woodson Center are saying. It's psychologically harmful. It's psychologically harmful to all children. And especially young children. As the mother of an adult son, I know little kids don't really see race, but you're introducing it into the classroom. That it's toxic. It's really toxic.
Right. And to say that nothing's changed. You talk about that poem. Well, he wrote that poem 50 years after emancipation. He wrote that when Woodrow Wilson was president. So you talk about the progress he had seen, and the progress between then to the next 50 years are even greater. And then even then, we're 50 years removed from that. So the fact that the people who are making these claims are all highly educated and highly successful people in the country that they claim that we can't get ahead in. So it's really problematic, but people buy into it, which is another part of the reason why you and I think it's so dangerous, is because people read it and believe it. It's like they can see what's happening in front of them, and then they read this and they still say, if I got to take a pick, I'm going to believe this. So ignore the relationships, ignore the interracial marriages, ignore the politicians, the Black politicians, ignore all that. I'm going to go with this because I think this is true, because these people are educated and they're telling me that based on what they know, and they know better. And it's really scary.
Yeah, it really is. It really is when you talk about that, it's really an elite group of people that are pushing this. Into our educational system. And it's quite ironic that the creator of this project has become a very wealthy woman as a result, So, what it does, and it ties into critical race theory, which I know you will go into in your book, but what it does is it substitutes reality. It substitutes theory for reality. Mm-hmm. So what you can say, there are interracial marriages, there are no segregation laws, we've had the Civil Rights Acts, but But that's all negated by this fantasy that is woven from history, as if, what happened 200 years ago is more relevant today than what happened 20 years ago or 2 years ago.
Coming up, more with Mary Grabar, author of Debunking the 1619 Project. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
We return to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer. Once again, here's Charles Love.
Are you tired of summer nights in Maine?
Welcome back. I'm continuing my conversation with Mary Grabar, author of Debunking the 1619 Project. And in the last segment, we were talking about some of the problems of the 1619 Project, the problems of saying the whole of America is about slavery, and the fact that I admit that there's a lot of truth to what they say, but there's problems with some inaccuracies, but mostly them getting off into lies of omission and terrible, illogical conclusions. Here, we talk about that issue. When I point out the problems and the inaccuracies in the 1619, there are some factual inaccuracies, and we can point those out. But I spend the bulk of my time focusing on the lies of omission, because I think that's more glaring.
Right.
And there were two things that you said that made me think of it as funny. One was talk about the sugar plantation. They even in their essays mention it. They don't even realize they're doing it. So because it's in order. One of the essays is about capitalism, and they're talking about cotton, and they're talking about the money that cotton made. Cotton made the country rich. Cotton did this. Cotton's bad. Being an enslaved person on a cotton plantation is so bad. Right. But then later, when they're shifting to a different topic, they're talking about sugar. It's a chapter on an essay on sugar. In that essay, they talk about, factually accurate, how as bad as we talked about earlier, the cotton plantations were, that was like a summer camp compared to the sugar plantations, right? Which is factually true. They talk about how bad it is, how it was sun up to sundown on the cotton plantation, but on the sugar plantation, you had to work overnight. The plant, all this other stuff, people would fall in and they would die. And all this ugly stuff, people just drop dead from heat. But what they don't really highlight, they mentioned it, but they don't highlight is that wasn't how sugar needs heat to grow, right? So even though they imported a little bit of sugar cane here to do stuff, the plantations had to be in the Caribbean. So you are admitting in your essay that the slavery in Jamaica and Haiti was far worse than the slavery in America, while your whole overarching theme is that America is the worst place in the history of the world. But if you don't read that with context, you don't catch that. And then the second thing is you mentioned Jefferson's original Declaration of Independence that he wrote about the slavery. Most of the founders, because there's a big section in Jones's essay about the founders and about the idea of America being a lie. That's the whole premise of it. And right. She talks about the founders, and she talks about they were slaveholders and all this stuff, which is true. But I find it interesting that you think to make your argument stronger, you put in some other facts. That she has no quotes of which you and I both know there are many from any of the founders that were negative towards slavery. No Washington, no Madison, no Benjamin Franklin, no 1/3 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were abolitionists. None of that found its way into the project. So that proves that there's an agenda, because you could say that Jefferson was bad and Jefferson was right. Say, oh, no, he did say this, but this. But the fact that you won't even admit that he said it proves you have an agenda. And I think those are the key points that it's important for people like you and I to point out, because it's really hard to explain your way out of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's the lies by omission, and the sad thing is, if you don't have that background knowledge like you do, and you're in second grade. I mean, this stuff is being taught in second grade. It's like, oh, the teacher's saying it. It's in this book. It's in this material, and it's going to be on the quiz, and it's going to be on the test, and you have to learn it. It's the truth. And so it's really a criminal effort. I mean, it really is an attempt to sort of squeeze, 400 years of history into a magazine. I mean, it's ludicrous when you think about it. And then you've got 17 literary works, mm-hmm. And I read them, and some of them I quote, and it's like this, like Dadaism or something, or the French surrealists, and what is this? You can't even follow it. It's like this experimental writing, and it just conveys emotion about dead bodies and suffering and evil white slave owners. And it's just very impressionistic. And so you're trying to squeeze in 400 years of history, and then you're including all this nonsensical creative writing.
Right.
Right. So that's an obvious diversion from real history. And, I taught college English for a long time, and, what's the difference between fact and fiction? Well, in the 1619 Project, it all kind of blends together. And like you said, they are relying on people accepting this emotionally. Black kids to, have excuses to, and of course they become depressed and hopeless and angry. And white kids, are supposed to feel guilt and responsibility. And then they look at each other like, you're an oppressor, or you're oppressed. And it's all done through mostly emotional manipulation. It's, I don't know if you noticed, but there's like a trigger warning, right, in the editor's introduction. That's there purposely. They want to set you up so that it's almost like a kind of blackmail. If you don't recognize how horrible things were, the history we're presenting to you here in these pages, then you are a racist, basically. That's the message.
Right. It's the kiddie school. Doing nothing is not enough. If you're not actively against XYZ, then you might as well just be a slave owner. What's the difference?
Exactly. Yeah.
So obviously, you know a lot about Zinn and the people's history of the United States. You wrote your previous book is Debunking Howard Zinn. So can you talk about what similarities, if any, are there between the approach Zinn was making on America and pointing out his views of the toxic history of America, the truth in his words, and that of the 1619 Project?
Yeah, well, they're both Marxist approaches to history. Howard Zinn said that, America had no reason for being, that it was illegitimate as a nation. And the 1619 Project says that, the country was founded as a slavocracy. And Howard Zinn also misrepresented slavery, Abraham Lincoln. He misrepresented the civil rights movement, and he glorified revolution and violence. And that's also what the 1619 Project does. And Nikole Hannah-Jones, of course, said she was proud to have inspired the riots of last year. But both basically throw question on the legitimacy of this country. They both say that there needs to be some kind of a revolutionary transformation to overcome this legacy of exploitation and slavery. And, Nikole Hannah-Jones, her goal is to transform people, convert them to the far left of the Democratic Party, and to progress on towards a socialist takeover.
So here's an interesting question for you. This might be the hardest question you've ever been asked. Which one's worst? Zinn or the 1619 Project? More damaging?
I would have to say the 1619 Project.
Yeah.
Because and the reason is obviously it's the hot thing right now, right? And it also it focuses on the sore point in American history, and it is absolutely intended to be divisive, or it is divisive if you accept it between races. And so it focuses on that more. Zinn was more, the class struggle sort of thing, the workers and the Indians and, the other groups, the non-Europeans.
It's not tearing a scab at such a sensitive issue like this 1619 project. The 1619 project is definitely tearing at our emotions, both Black anger and white guilt. Coming up, more with Mary Grabar, debunking the 1619 project. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Mary Grabar, author of Debunking the 1619 Project. And up to this point, I've been saying a lot about some of the problems I've seen with the project. As you know, I'm writing the book Race Crazy, and a lot of that is about the project. So here I asked Mary what she felt she needed to debunk and why, and point out how people like Nikole Hannah-Jones think that America's bad and blame them for everything while giving all the other actors of racism a pass. I guess we should get to some of the things that you have to actually debunk. So what are some of the things that you, in your book, that you point out that are just factually inaccurate that you have to correct from the 1619 Project?
Well, first of all, the ship that the Africans arrived on was not a pirate ship. It was a privateer. A small technical detail. The Africans were not kidnapped by the Europeans. The Europeans did not go in, to the interior of Africa unassisted, right? They very rarely did, but when they did do that, those rare occasions, they had the assistance of tribes, of warring tribes. So they had they were called the Imbagala. They were a warrior tribe and helped them on this particular shipload. And then when these people were enslaved, they were marched to the shore, to the barracoons, to the holding pens or buildings, and they were then traded by African or Muslim middlemen. And generally what you had were the Europeans waiting on the shore to finish the deal and to purchase them. So it's not the way she presents it, and the way it's increasingly presented is that the Europeans went into the interior of Africa and raided these villages. That just did not happen. And of course, slavery was being practiced in Africa for centuries. Before the Europeans came, it was practiced all across the globe. As you know, it was justified by all the major religions. It's been practiced since time immemorial. And so it's not a uniquely American thing, as, Nikole Hannah-Jones would have us believe, nor did, we take most of the slaves that were transported in the transatlantic slave trade. It was only between 5 and 7%. So this was a worldwide phenomenon. It was cruel, it was unjust, but it was not exclusively American.
Right. And that's the point that I always make. They make that point a lot, saying that this is an American thing. And now, I give them their argument often. So they'll say, the slavery of the, 8th century Muslims and the slavery that's all, in indentured servitude and these other things are different than chattel slavery. Say, okay, how about the fact that, you're talking about somewhere around 12.5 million people and 400,000 people came to America. Why don't we care about the 12.3 is the first question. The other question, I asked someone recently, and I always get different answers. It'd be interesting to hear what you say. So 1619 is the year America brought these slaves in, and you had African slaves in America, in that period. But we all know that the country was founded after a war, the Revolutionary War. Of course, they make some very dubious points about that as well. But you have this war, and because they won, you have this new country. So between 1619 and this war, were these slaves really in America? See, we're looking at this with this weird 2021 American eye. But I always find it interesting that we find some way, these people who make this argument, to give total pass to the Portuguese, the British, and the Spanish, and French for that matter. But why is that? What do you think about that? The fact that those slaves that were being held in 1684 were not being held by Americans? Because nobody thought of America as America. There was no America. They were either British or they were Portuguese, or if they were in Louisiana, they were French, or they were in Florida, they were Spanish. They were being held by all these groups, but we've given a pass to all those groups.
Well, you have to look at the politics of the creator of the project. She is basically a Marxist, and that has been the Marxist propaganda since the Communist Party was established in New York City in 1919. So we should have been marking that anniversary too, I think, because, Lenin, gave distinct orders. He said, use this issue of race. That's the weak part of American culture. And the strategy is to divide and conquer. And that's what communists have done throughout the world and throughout history, including in the country where I was born, which is Slovenia. It was then part of communist Yugoslavia. So, it's deliberate. It's, it's very short-sighted. It's very narrowly focused. But it's got a purpose to it. It's a political agenda, and the 1619 Project is a political document. It's propaganda, but it's being tragically used in classrooms across the country, the majority of them.
Coming up, more with Mary Grabar. You are listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of the Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Mary Grabar, author of Debunking the 1619 Project. And here I ask her about the project as I talk about Reconstruction and the things that they use. And they do a creative way of pointing out the problems. But why they have nothing positive to say, how they creatively leave out things that could add nuance to the stories that they're telling, but they don't add them, and why this is another reason there's a problem with the project.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's, when you ask me about, the commonalities between her history and Howard Zinn's, it's a simplified version with so many things that, are left out, and you mentioned the civil rights workers who were killed. I mean, to not even acknowledge people who willingly put their lives at risk, to overcome segregation and slavery before that is really, it's such a disservice. So it's not history. History is complicated. Ideally, I think if you're reading history, the historian should not be trying to manipulate your emotions. It should be opening up new worlds. If I read a good history book, I'm constantly looking at the footnotes, and I want to learn more about this one particular point, or I'm curious about the background of it, and it leads me to something else. And that's what school should be. It should be fostering this inquisitiveness, not shutting down conversations, which the 1619 Project intends to do among little kids, right? So if you go along with the 1619 Project and you disagree with any part, you point out things like, you did Grant, well, you're a racist or you're a race traitor, right? And that just shuts everything down. And that it just speaks to how corrupt our educational system has become, that this is being incorporated, and that that this nonprofit collaborating with the for-profit has just so skillfully slipped these in. I mean, can you imagine any other kind of effort? If you were trying to get 4,500 schools to adopt your curriculum, how much power, how much coordination was going on here? And it's not just the Pulitzer Center, it's PBS, it's, the teachers' unions are pushing this, New Zealand, this news service that comes in with news stories at appropriate reading levels. So it's this collaborative effort, and it's political, but it's very, very harmful.
Right. And lastly, I got to leave you with this. I often, like I said a couple of times in our conversation, say, let's give them their argument, because, they're intellectually weak and, and they don't think this stuff through. So, if you give them their argument, you say, what's next? It's interesting to find out what you find. And so you wrote this book about 1619 and the book about Howard Zinn. You know them well. So they both argue that America's fundamentally bad for both, reasons, whether it's class or race. And there's no fixing it. There's no tinkering around the edges. We just need to tear this whole thing down and rebuild it. So now we're going to give them their argument. We're going to tear it. They're right. You and I have finally seen the light. So we're tearing it all down. What do we replace it with?
Well, first there's the dictatorship of the proletariat. Wait, let's review our Marxist history here.
Right. Let's just see what happened in the past.
Right. So there's a dictatorship of the proletariat. All the peasants get their land. But then, after a while, the land is taken away and collectivized. And guess who gets all the riches? And, who's in charge of distributing this property equally and equitably, right? So, the outcome is very predictable. And everyone is equally impoverished and hungry, except for the elite group, who are running things and have their vacation homes, whether it was by the Black Sea or Martha's Vineyard or wherever. They're the elites. And we will all be just these peons and serfs, blacks and whites and people of all ethnicities. And there is no other plan other than the one where these same people who think themselves as being in a position of dictating what is true in history when they themselves are ignorant of it and unwilling to even investigate or be corrected, these are the same people that want to be in power. They're going to be the ones making the decisions. Who's going to get medical care? Who's going to get food? Who's going to get a car? Electric car or gas car. And so it's the use of history for a political outcome, and the political outcome, I know I'll be called a red baiter, which is what they do, but the outcome is a Marxist outcome, and it has never turned out well. No matter what Nicole Hannah-Jones says about Cuba, I doubt that she ever talked to a real Cuban, who could speak honestly with her.
Coming up, my final segment with Mary Grabar, author of Debunking the 1619 Project. You are listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. I've reached my final segment with Mary Grabar, author of Debunking the 1619 Project, exposing the plan to divide America. And in this segment, we kind of talk about why those people believe them buy into this project, follow it. Not just the people with an angle, but people who think they're doing the best for the country. I agree that there are certain elites who will see a prize at the end of this rainbow. But what's scary is there's a large swath of people who, for whatever reason, their education in the past, indoctrination by colleges, following these terrible projects, who believe what they're saying. But if you ask them at their core, they don't really want everything about America to change. So I am most concerned about those people who are going to help this happen because they're following it along, because they're like, hey, there'll be no more racism. And, all these systems that we think are unfair will be brought down to be equal, but they don't realize that they're going to be completely torn down and replaced with something they hate most. So I think it'll be too late, but at some point they're going to realize, but wait a minute, but what you're replacing it with will make me worse off than I am now. And that's the scary part, that people don't realize that.
Yeah, and I think that's also the dangerous thing, because the creators of the 1619 Project and similar histories, if Americans generally didn't care about racism, they would just ignore it. But I think Americans generally want to be accepting. There are a few exceptions, but there wouldn't be guilt unless the vast majority of Americans believed in equality and equal opportunity, and judging a person by their character rather than the color of their skin, as Martin Luther King said. So that's why it's harder to criticize the 1619 Project, because you are automatically charged with not caring about that. And that's why it has reverberated through our culture, because people don't want to be bigoted or racist or anything like that, which I think speaks well, but they are, as you say, sadly mistaken. They don't realize what the impetus is, and it's not really to bring us together, it's to tear us apart for a larger political goal.
Right. And unfortunately, because of that guilt, bad people are able to exploit it and push stuff like this, which is just going to make it worse off for all of us. She is Mary Grabar, resident fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization, author of the wildly popular book Debunking Howard Zinn, and the new book Debunking the 1619 Project, Exposing the Plan to Divide America. Mary, it's been great talking with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.